Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Midnight News Edition with me, Mariam Zian. To the headlines. Another Zionist massacre. 12 Palestinians were killed inside a school sheltering the displaced in Gaza. Among the victims, a journalist, and the resistance accuses the U.S. of supporting the massacres. Also coming up next, in Khan Yunis and Dir al-Balah, 25 more killed following 3 massacres committed by the occupation on Tuesday. Next, Palestinian Health Ministry condemns the delay in receiving polio vaccines amidst denunciations of starvation tactics against Palestinians, while the UN confirms the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Strip. And in the situation in Libya, the UN warns of the impact of unilateral security measures, urging all parties to adhere to the political process. The details after the break. Welcome again to the program. We start with the latest developments in the occupied Palestinian territories. Well, 12 Palestinians were killed, including children and women, were martyred, and others were injured on Tuesday in an airstrike by the occupation's warplanes on the Mustafa Hafid school, which was sheltering displaced people in the Al Rimal neighborhood west of Gaza City, according to the Palestinian news agency.
Since the beginning of August and until now, we are talking about 9 inhabitant schools that were turned into shelters that have been struck by the Israeli occupation forces. The latest strike was the Tابعouna school, and today the Mustafa Hafid school was struck, and there was a number of martyrs.
The massacre at the Mustafa Hafid school is considered the 4th massacre committed by the Zionist occupation forces in schools sheltering displaced people since the beginning of this month, leaving around 200 martyrs. Journalist Mustafa or Hamza Murtaja was martyred in the bombing of the Mustafa Hafid school west of Gaza City, joining his brother, the martyred journalist Yasser Murtaja. According to a statement from the media office in Gaza on Tuesday, the number of martyred journalists has risen to 170 since the beginning of the genocidal war on the Gaza Strip, following the martyrdom of the journalist Hamza Murtaja, who worked as a photographer and journalist with several media outlets. In response to the massacre, the resistance committees in Palestine held the U.S. administration responsible for the massacre carried out by the Zionist occupation against displaced Palestinians at the Mustafa Hafid school. On Tuesday, the media office of the Resistance Committee stated that the massacre at the Mustafa Hafid school would not have happened without the approval of Blinken and a green light from the Biden administration, which is seen as a complicit with the international community. Their support for and cover-up of the genocide encouraged the occupation to commit further massacres against the Palestinians. The Zionist occupation continues to commit massacres and to wage its genocidal war against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip by targeting schools that shelter displaced people, resulting in dozens of martyrs and wounded. Meanwhile, Biden said in election-related statements that he would stop the war in Gaza. Zara Farjani has the report.
A massacre adds to the occupation's brutal record of extermination, following a Zionist airstrike on Mustafa Hafiz School. And just days earlier, a Tabi'in school awoke at dawn to the massacre of worshippers. This followed similar atrocities in other schools for the displaced, homes and entire residential blocks that were obliterated. The aggression on the ground continues, with talk of a ceasefire only appearing in media statements, completely disconnected from reality.
We're working around the clock, my Secretary of State, to prevent a wider war and reunite hostages with their families and surge humanitarian health and food assistance into Gaza now. To end the civilian suffering of the Palestinian people and finally deliver a ceasefire and end this war.
Amid an ongoing campaign of extermination, displacement and starvation in full view of the world, Blinken is in the Middle East to discuss resuming negotiations between an oppressor whose doctrine is built on massacres and a resistance steadfast in defending its land.
Blinken's statement after his meeting with the enemy's prime minister that the Zionist entity has agreed to the document is a statement that raises many ambiguities. Netanyahu's response to this was that it is an updated document. An updated document means it is not the one that was originally presented to us, nor is it the one that Hamas agreed upon. If the Israelis agreed to the document, then why wasn't the American side moved forward with implementing it?
Under the cover of international complacency and silence, the Zionist entity continues its aggression on the Gaza Strip for 11 months, killing, brutalizing and starving Palestinians, recreating scenes of war atrocities that are among the worst in human history.
The government media office in Gaza stated that the occupation army committed 3 massacres on Tuesday by bombing a school, a market, and a mobile phone charging station in 3 provinces of the Gaza Strip, resulting in 25 martyrs and dozens of injuries. The government media office confirmed that these massacres are part of the ongoing genocide, for which the occupation employs various policies, including the targeting of civilians in shelters, displacement centers, and gatherings.
We strongly condemn the ongoing massacres perpetrated by Israeli occupation army against displacement shelter centers, markets, and civilian gathering places. We hold the Israeli occupation and the U.S. administration fully responsible for the catastrophic and dangerous consequences of these continued atrocities. We call on the international community, all international organizations, and all countries committed to justice to exert pressure on the Israeli occupation and the American administration to end this genocidal war and hold the massacres against civilians in the Gaza Strip.
The Zionist occupation forces committed 3 massacres in the Gaza Strip, with 34 Palestinians arriving at hospitals, in addition to 114 others injured within a span of 24 hours. In a statement on Tuesday, the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza announced that the death toll from the ongoing Zionist aggression on the Gaza Strip has risen to 40,173 martyrs, along with 92,857 injured since the beginning of the aggression on October 7th. Bodies of 13 martyrs were brought to the Nasser Medical Hospital following the continuous airstrikes by the occupation on Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. 13 Palestinians were martyred and others were injured as a result of artillery shelling north of Khan Yunis, coinciding with heavy gunfire from occupation helicopters. The attack targeted a tent near Al-Huda Mosque in the As-Satr al-Gharbi area of Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. At least 9 Palestinians, including a woman and 2 children, were killed in an Israeli airstrike on a crowded marketplace in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza. The area, labeled as a civilian safe zone by the Zionist army, reported several injuries, and the death toll is expected to rise due to the severity of the wounds.
There were civilian kids who were passing by in the market, and the occupation targeted civilian passers-by in the market. We are not surprised that the occupation commits such a massacres against our people. This is a criminal policy, and this is racist. We will not kneel. We are the owners of this land, and we will stay on it as long as we are alive, and we will not surrender. And I say to Biden that history will pursue him for these crimes committed against our people.
The Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza stated that it is still awaiting the arrival of vaccines for the polio vaccination campaign. The ministry noted on Tuesday that the vaccination campaign requires safe conditions to allow medical teams to reach all children, which necessitates a ceasefire during the campaign period. The government media office condemned the use of starvation and the denial of food by the Zionist occupation and the U.S. administration as a means of political pressure against civilians in the Gaza Strip. In a statement on Tuesday, the media office expressed its absolute rejection of linking the provision of aid and food to children and civilians and women with the ceasefire decision. It considered that linking these issues as a clear crime that warrants condemnation from the international community, international organizations, and all free countries. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warned of the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip due to repeated waves of displacement, overcrowding, lack of security, the collapse of infrastructure, ongoing hostilities, and limited services. The office stated in a Tuesday statement that the continuation of hostilities, evacuation orders, and severe shortages of essential materials are making it increasingly difficult for displaced families to access basic services at the locations they reach.
Since October, 86% of the Gaza Strip, some 314 square kilometers, has been placed under evacuation orders. Gaza's population is increasingly concentrated inside a zone designated by Israeli authorities in Al-Mawasi, where Palestinians have been directed to go. This density of this area has surged to between 30,000 and 34,000 people per square kilometer. This is compared to an estimated 1,200 people per square kilometer prior to October.
Hamas criticized U.S. President Joe Biden's statements accusing the movement of abandoning the Gaza settlement plan, calling them misleading. They see Biden's remarks as a renewed green light for the extremist Zionist government to escalate its actions against civilians. Hamas reaffirmed its commitment to the July 2 agreement, which is based on Biden's declaration and a Security Council resolution, and called on mediators to ensure the occupation accepts the U.S. president's proposal.
We have followed with great astonishment and dismay the statements made by US President Joe Biden. These are misleading claims, and we consider them a renewed green light from the United States to the extremist Israeli government to commit further atrocities. These statements do not reflect the true stance of the movement. These statements do not align with our genuine efforts to achieve a ceasefire. Instead, they exemplify the U.S. total bias towards the Zionist occupation, its active role in the aggression, and its support for the war of genocide against defenseless civilians in Gaza, all while undermining our national cause.
Occupation forces accompanied by large troops invaded the Wadi al-Juz neighborhood in occupied Al-Quds and began demolishing commercial establishments in the industrial area. This is in preparation for the implementation of the Silicon Valley Settler project, following a long legal battle to protect the shops and workshops. Salman Nasib has more details.
Taking advantage of the world's preoccupation with its barbaric war on the Gaza Strip, the occupation targets commercial and industrial shops and destroys the livelihood of thousands of Palestinians in Wadi al-Juz neighborhood in preparation for the Silicon Valley settlement project.
What happened is that they issued a demolishing order. They took advantage of the current war happening in Gaza. Unfortunately, there is no one to stop them from all the atrocities they are causing. No one tells them to stop. Don't you think they are going to hit this building?
This comes after years of struggle in the entity's courts to protect the shops, land, and all the facilities that existed before the occupation, whose owners work in professions inherited from their grandfathers.
They demolished all the shops without any prior notice. There were 2 shops behind me. They were unfortunately demolished. Both of them were built before 1967, before the Israeli occupation of Palestine.
Because the location of this neighborhood is considered strategic, it has not been spared from being surrounded by settlement projects, and the next step is to penetrate the heart of occupied Al-Quds within the project of demolition. It never occurred to the residents of Wadi al-Juz neighborhood that the occupation would demolish their workshops that were built nearly 80 years ago.
It's been 80 years since we opened these shops, not 1 or 2 days ago. They are saying that they want to build 15 floors buildings and shops with the name of Silicon Valley instead of Wadi al-Juz.
Silicon Valley may be linked to development and major projects in other countries, but in occupied Al-Quds, it is linked to a Zionist settlement project with the aim to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state with East Al-Quds as its capital.
On Tuesday, the Algerian gas tanker Tasala rescued 30 migrants from various nationalities after their boat wrecked off Sardinia. The ship responded to an urgent distress call from the Italian Coast Guard and provided assistance to the stranded passengers. And the Italian Coast Guard thanked the tanker's crew for their help. Stay tuned for news on the ongoing presidential election campaign in Algeria, scheduled for September 7th after the break. On Tuesday, several leaders of parties supporting independent presidential candidate Abdelmajid Tebboune called on Algerians to head to the polls on September 7 to vote for him. Mustafa Yahya, Secretary General of the National Democratic Rally Party RND, stated at a rally in Skikda, eastern Algeria, that his party's candidate aims to increase the GDP from $255 billion to $400 billion within 3 years. Fatah Boularaq, president of the Mustaqbal Front Party, emphasized that Tebboune is the candidate for youth and presented a promising and ambitious program aimed at establishing a social and economic system that meets the aspirations of the Algerian people.
He wants to work towards creating an environment where Algeria can become an emerging nation. To this end, he set criteria and goals, stating that Algeria's gross domestic product, which is currently around $255 to $265 billion, should reach $400 billion in 2 to 3 years. He emphasized that there can be no full sovereignty without a strong economy.
Today we stand as representatives of this man, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, the independent candidate who steps forward in the name of the youth, the Algerian people, and the women of Algeria, with a promising and ambitious program aimed at once again establishing a social and economic system that matches these sacrifices, these heroics, and these aspirations.
Abdelkader Ben Grina, president of the National Al-Bina Movement Party, stated at an election rally in Algiers that the upcoming presidential election will reflect the people's desire for stability and progress. He described the independent candidate Abdelmajid Tebboune as embodying the nation's aspirations for the future and as the right man for the current phase.
وفاء لعهد الشهداء والمجاهدين، صونا لوديعة الشهداء، استكمالا لمسار الإصلاحات والإنجازات.
The President of the Republic and our candidate for the presidential elections of September 7th, Abdelmajid Tebboune, insisted and succeeded in preserving the legacy of the martyrs and fighters, continuing the process of reforms and achievements, preserving the constants of our nation, consecrating the social character of the state, consolidating democracy and freedom, preserving social unity, and ensuring the preservation of national memory.
حرص رئيس الجمهورية عبد المجيد تبون ومرشحنا اليوم للانتخابات الرئاسية ليوم 7 سبتمبر في هذا الملف وحقق فيه العديد.
Our country is moving towards the future, and the man of the moment that we have chosen to present us in the electoral appointment is Abdelmajid Tebboune.
هو عبد المجيد تبون.
Abdelali Hassani Sharif, the presidential candidate from the Movement of Homs party, stated that his election program aims to address economic, developmental and social issues. During a rally in Tiaret, Western Algeria, Hassani Sharif explained that his program focuses on establishing social peace and strengthening family cohesion by prioritizing citizen welfare and implementing comprehensive reforms across various sectors.
لأننا احنا يا إخواني الشيء اللي متفقين عليه برنامج يقوم على إرساء.
The program is based on establishing social stability. Our program aims to protect youth from major issues, particularly as external lobbies attempt to flood the country with drugs and hallucinogens. Our program, called The Opportunity, is designed to strengthen families and reinforce social cohesion. It is also a program to encourage cultural and sports innovations. Here in Tiaret, a place known for sports, 2 Algerians from Tiaret won 2 gold medals in the Olympics, bringing honor to both the people of Tiaret and Algeria. Our program is centered on a free economic and social approach, meaning that the economy we aim to establish in the country will be based on freedom, freedom of trade, freedom of investment, freedom of import and export with regulation, and freedom of production. It will also include the freedom to establish small and medium-sized enterprises, grounded fundamentally on freedom and social justice. Wealth must benefit all our citizens, and all our institutions must belong to all Algerians. Our program ensures this opportunity for a rising, stable, and strong nation, for a growing and developing economy, and for social stability, ensuring the preservation of our nation's values and principles as laid out in the Declaration of 1st November and reaffirmed by the Somam Congress and all revolutionary documents. It aims to keep this nation free and to remain a bastion that defends Palestine, supports resistance, and stands in solidarity with the cause of resistance.
Presidential candidate Youssef Aouchiche called on young people to vote in the September 7 election to bring about change, following the example of the fighters and martyrs who bore a responsibility in securing independence for Algeria. In a statement during his campaign in Kharroub Constantine province, eastern Algeria, Aouchiche emphasized that youth are needed to participate in the nation-building effort, highlighting that Algeria is facing a historic and pivotal opportunity for change.
حنا قلنا لهم نلتزموا باش نغيروا الامور يعني كيف لازم الشباب نتاعنا اليوم.
We said that we are committed to changing things, which means that our youth must take responsibility, just as our martyrs did when they were young. Today, our youth must bear the responsibility and contribute to the battle of nation building. Today, there is a historic opportunity for Algerian youth to dedicate themselves to change, to build institutions with legitimacy, to restore the value of popular sovereignty and build our institutions based on popular sovereignty, political participation for all, and justice and equality among all Algerians.
نرجعوا الاعتبار للسيادة الشعبية ونبنيو مؤسساتنا على أساس السيادة الشعبية، على أساس المشاركة السياسية للجميع، وعلى أساس العدل والمساواة بين جميع الجزائريات والجزائريين. قلنا اليوم الفرصة هي أيضا لتمكين شبابنا من أدوات العمل السياسي وأدوات الرقي والازدهار الاقتصادي. الكثير من المشاكل طرحت من طرف الشباب والتزمنا سواء في برنامجنا أو في محادثاتنا.
We said that today the opportunity is also to empower our youth with the tools of political work and the tools of economic advancement and prosperity. Many problems have been raised by the youth, and we are committed, both in our program and in our discussions with the youth of the Constantine province, to addressing and taking care of all these problems that have been brought to us, especially the integration of the youth working within the contract system, and also taking care of the youth who are victims of the ANSEJ organization. In this regard, we are committed to creating spaces that enable our young men and women to engage in building their nation's economy, to invest and also to innovate, because they have many talents.
باش ينخرطوا في بناء اقتصاد وطنهم ويستثمروا وأيضا يبدعوا ويبتكروا لأنهم عندهم الكثير من الموارد.
The Polisario Front asserted that resolving the ongoing conflict in Western Sahara since 1975 can only be achieved through strict and resolute implementation of international legality, which affirms the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. The statement concluded the meeting of the Permanent Office of the National Secretariat of the Polisario Front, chaired by its Secretary General and Sahrawi President Ibrahim Ghali. The Polisario Front emphasized the United Nations' mandatory responsibility to oversee and complete the decolonization process in Western Sahara. Acting head of the UN support mission in Libya, Stephanie Khouri, warned that unilateral security measures by political, military, and security actors in Libya are increasing tensions. During a Security Council session on Tuesday discussing the situation in Libya, Khouri noted a rapid deterioration in the country's political, economic, and security conditions over the past 2 months.
Has deteriorated quite over the past 2 months. The situation in Libya has deteriorated quite rapidly in terms of political, economic, and security stability. Unilateral acts by Libyan political, military, and security actors have increased tension, further entrenched institutional and political divisions, and complicated efforts for a negotiated solution. Let me share some of these recent incidents. On 9th August, the Libyan National Army moved unilaterally towards southwestern parts of Libya, sparking Western forces and groups to mobilize and assert their readiness to respond to any attack. While the Libyan National Army later clarified its purpose in moving these forces was to secure the southwestern border, this move generated tensions in the West and raised concerns with Libya's neighbor Algeria.
Libya's permanent representative to the UN, Tahir al-Sunni, questioned the Security Council's role in addressing the crisis in his country, which has persisted for over a decade. He remarked that the statements made during the session about Libya merely express concern and condemnation without offering practical solutions.
بصراحة وعلى الرغم من زيادة تعقد الأزمة السياسية في ليبيا.
Despite the complexity of the political crisis in Libya and its entry into a very critical phase, and the fact that Libya has been subject to Chapter 7 all these years, this Council is still unable to take any practical steps that will help get out of this long-standing crisis. The most important of this is not holding obstructionists accountable, whether individuals or countries, and even the volume of foreign interference in the Libyan issue has increased clearly and openly to everyone. Despite the decisions and statements of this council calling for the United Nations to play an active role and media to find practical solutions to the Libyan crisis, no agreement has been reached even to appoint the new UN envoy, and the position has remained vacant for more than 4 months. In short, no agreement has been reached to appoint the new UN envoy. The international leadership did not succeed in the solution under Chapter 7 and did not let the Libyans lead the solution themselves. So what do you expect to happen other than what's happening now?
فماذا تتوقعون أن يحدث غير ما يحدث الآن؟
Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight's program. Thanks for tuning in and have a great night.